In the beginning of the film, we are taken into the midst of a forest in Argentina. As it turns out, in the middle of the forest, there is a house owned by a man named Duke. We are told that Duke used to be a government secret agent, but ever since his brother was killed by the mafia boss, Duke chose to leave the secret agency and live alone in the middle of this forest. Not long after, Duke hears suspicious noises indicating someone is trying to sneak into his house. Quickly, Duke checks and manages to catch the intruder. It turns out the intruder is Duke's own niece named Juana. Then Duke brings Juana inside and asks her how she found out about Duke's whereabouts. Juana answers that her mother informed her. After that, Duke invites Juana for dinner, and then they continue to chat. Here, Juana says that ever since her father or Duke's brother died, she couldn't live peacefully and always haunted by the memory of her deceased father. Therefore, Juana came to Duke's house because she wanted a change of scenery and hoped to forget about her father. The next morning, we see Juana and Duke playing chess. Juana is very skilled, easily defeating Duke. Not long after, Duke notices on his CCTV monitor that several people have arrived at his house. Duke asks Juana if she invited her friends. Juana answers no, so Duke quickly retrieves his weapon. Then Duke asks Juana to hide in the basement room while he fights off the attackers. Here, Duke manages to eliminate one of them, then he asks Juana to hide in the basement. However, Duke is attacked again by another man, leading to a fierce fight. After a long struggle, Duke finally defeats the man, but he is then confronted by the leader of the group attacking him. It turns out this leader is the right-hand man of the mafia boss who killed Duke's brother. His arrival here is to kidnap Juana on the orders of the mafia boss. Duke, unwilling to surrender, tries to fight the right-hand man, leading to another duel. In the end, Duke manages to defeat the right-hand man and quickly takes Juana away from there. Along the way, Duke contacts a man named Malcosido. It turns out Malcosido is a former neighbor of Duke, and Duke has entrusted some of his weapons to Malcosido. Duke asked Malcosido to meet at their usual meeting place right away. Upon arrival, Duke explained that he had just been attacked by a group of people. Currently, Duke needed the weapons he had entrusted to Malcosido before. However, Malcosido replied that he was busy at the moment and promised to give the weapons to Duke tomorrow morning. In the end, Duke understood and left. Afterwards, Duke went to the house of one of his associates named Nancy. Here, Duke left Juana with Nancy because his house had just been attacked, and Duke himself needed to go to meet his former boss at the special agency, promising to return soon. A few minutes later, Duke was seen meeting with his former boss. Here, Duke explained that his house had just been attacked by a highly trained group of people. Duke requested permission to eliminate them all, and also to recruit his former team members from his time as a special agent. Duke had to ask for permission because if something happened, his boss would protect Duke and the team from legal trouble. After hearing Duke's explanation, the boss finally granted permission. After that, Duke returned to Nancy's house. However, upon arrival, Duke only saw the house in disarray, and Nancy was severely injured. Nancy could only apologize and said that Juana had been kidnapped by a group of people. Quickly, Duke took Nancy to the hospital for treatment. After Nancy received medical attention, Duke immediately returned to Nancy's house. Here, Duke entered the secret room and contacted each of his former team members from the special agency. The first person Duke contacted was Lair, the best hacker who now lived in the Middle East. Duke asked Lair to come to headquarters the next morning because there was an urgent mission they needed to complete. Despite being initially discouraged by his wife, Lair chose to go and meet Duke, his former team member. Then, Duke contacted his former teammate Molo, who was in Mexico. Besides being skilled in combat, Molo also had expertise in defusing and assembling bombs. Duke contacted Molo and stated that if he needed Molo's assistance, he hoped Molo would come to his headquarters the next morning. Ultimately, Molo agreed because he considered Duke as his own brother. After that, Duke contacted his last teammate named Sofia. Sofia was not an ordinary woman as she was skilled in martial arts. Sofia was also Duke's former girlfriend when they were on the same team at the special agency. Duke immediately asked Sophia to come to headquarters the next morning because he needed her help. The scene shifts to Joanna being held captive by the mafia boss. Here, the mafia boss said that he would never harm Joanna as long as Duke complied with his orders. However, if Duke refused to obey, it was certain that Joanna would join her father in another realm. Shortly after, the mafia boss contacted Duke, who was currently at the hospital with Malcosido. Here, the mafia boss asked Duke to kidnap Olympia, a nuclear expert. The mafia boss would rely on Olympia for his personal interests. The mafia boss had already sent detailed files on where Duke could find Olympia. If Duke refused or betrayed him, it was certain that Duke would never see Joanna again. The next day, it showed the 3 former teammates of Duke from the special team arriving. Duke warmly welcomed them, including Sophia, his former girlfriend. After that, Duke immediately took them to fly to the location where they could find Olympia. During the journey, Duke explained to his 3 teammates that Joanna, his niece, had been kidnapped by the mafia boss, who had killed Duke's biological brother. The mafia boss asked Duke to kidnap Olympia, a nuclear scientist, and if Duke refused, the mafia boss would harm Joanna. Therefore, Duke asked for the help of his 3 teammates because he believed that if they united, they could handle all of this. Duke did not want to hand Olympia over to the mafia boss. He only wanted to trap the mafia boss. After that, Duke briefly asked Sophia, his former girlfriend, if she was married now. Sophia simply replied that Duke didn't need to know because it wasn't his concern. In short, Duke and his team had arrived near Olympia's factory. Before starting their mission, Duke first strategized with his team. After a lengthy discussion, Duke and Sophia would disguise themselves as employees and enter the factory to kidnap Olympia, while Molo would secure the situation outside and Lair and Malcosido would stand by in the car while hacking the CCTV. A few minutes later, Sophia and Duke began disguising themselves as factory employees to gain entry, while Molo started incapacitating the guards outside. Lair and Malcosido also began their actions by hacking the CCTV, then giving directions to Duke and the others. Shortly after, Duke and Sophia successfully entered and quickly made their way to Olympia's room. However, here they became trapped in a glass room because Sophia had entered the wrong password. Lair continued trying to hack the system to save Duke. Unfortunately, the system was protected by multiple layers of passwords. Molo immediately created an explosion, causing panic among everyone present. Duke and Sophia started running out of breath because there was no oxygen in the glass room at all. Fortunately, thanks to Molo's explosion earlier, the system malfunctioned, causing the glass room to open on its own. Quickly, Duke and Sophia went out, pretending that they were assigned to rescue Olympia. As a result, Olympia was handed over to them, and Duke and the others immediately took Olympia into the car. However, instead of driving cautiously, Duke drove recklessly, arousing suspicion among the other guards, leading to a chase. During the pursuit, Sophia tried to reassure Olympia by saying that they were all former special agents who were going to rescue her. Sophia didn't have time to explain it now, but she promised to explain everything later when their situation was safe. Meanwhile, Duke and his team continued to be chased by the guards and fired upon. Molo, feeling frustrated, threw a small bomb towards the guard's car, taking action. After that, they were blocked by 2 guard cars, but fearlessly, Duke broke through them. In the end, Duke and his team successfully evaded all the pursuing guards. After that, Duke and his team immediately transferred to the private plane they had prepared beforehand. Several hours later, Duke and the team brought Olympia to their headquarters. Here, Olympia asked what all of this meant. Duke explained that they were protecting Olympia because there was a mafia boss who wanted to kidnap her. The mafia boss had kidnapped Joanna and demanded that Duke exchange Joanna for Olympia. However, of course, Duke had no intention of doing so because he intended to trap the mafia boss by pretending to hand over Olympia. At the same time, the mafia boss contacted Duke and asked him to arrange an exchange between Joanna and Olympia. Duke agreed to the mafia boss's request, and they arranged to meet at one of the bridges in the city. Before leaving, Duke and his team strategized about the plan they would use. Duke suggested that he should be the one to meet the mafia boss, while the others would simply observe from a distance. Duke also decided not to bring Olympia along because he intended to lead the mafia boss to a certain location. Shortly after, they received a guest, Nancy, who had just been discharged from the hospital. Nancy was warmly welcomed, and they all continued the conversation regarding the earlier strategy. Long story short, Duke went alone to meet with the mafia boss, while his other teammates waited at headquarters. However, once Duke had left, Lair managed to track Juana's location, which was being held captive in the empty building. Quickly, Lair took Molo and Nancy to rescue Juana from the building. Meanwhile, at headquarters, Lair asked Sofia and Malcosito to guard Olympia. A few minutes later, Duke arrived to meet with the mafia boss, but when contacted, the mafia boss instead warned him not to try to trap him because it was the mafia boss who would trap Duke. On the other side, Lair, Nancy, and Molo arrived at the empty building to rescue Juana, but there was no one there because it was just a trap set by the mafia boss. Duke immediately contacted Lair and said that they all needed to return to headquarters because the mafia boss might have baited them to leave headquarters. That way, the mafia boss could easily kidnap Olympia, who was secured at headquarters. Quickly, they all hurried back to headquarters. However, upon arrival at headquarters, the entire place was in chaos, and Malcosito was seriously injured. It turned out that the mafia boss and his henchmen had just attacked Duke's headquarters to kidnap Olympia. Fortunately, Olympia was not successfully abducted because she was hiding with Sofia in the ventilation duct. That night, Duke and his team decided to move to their second headquarters, located in the wreckage of a ship. Here, they immediately rearranged their strategy on how to save Juana without surrendering Olympia. Not long after, the mafia boss contacted Duke, demanding that Olympia be handed over tonight. The mafia boss would indeed kill Juana if Duke did not hand over Olympia immediately. In the end, Duke agreed, but he wanted to hear Juana's voice first. Duke promised that he would soon free Juana. After that, Duke rearranged the strategy by asking Nancy to hand over Olympia to the mafia boss, but the one being handed over was not Olympia, but Sofia disguised as Olympia. Meanwhile, Olympia would be guarded by Lair. Everyone understood, and they immediately began their mission. Nancy managed to deceive the guards by bringing Sofia disguised as Olympia. After they entered, it turned out that Duke and Molo were hiding in the trunk of the car, and they would soon follow through the back entrance. During the journey, Duke and Molo had to confront the mafia boss's henchmen, leading to a shootout. After that, Duke asked Lair to cut off all the electricity there. When the power went out, the mafia boss realized something was wrong and took Juana to the rooftop. In the parking lot, Lair waited with Olympia. However, the mafia boss's right-hand man approached, and a physical altercation ensued. Lair passed out during the fight due to being outnumbered, and the mafia boss's right-hand man took Olympia to be taken to the mafia boss. Back on the rooftop, the mafia boss intended to escape using a helicopter. However, Nancy and Sofia, still disguised, arrived. The mafia boss, not being foolish, knew that what Nancy brought was not the real Olympia. This led to a standoff between the mafia boss and Sofia, both pointing guns at each other. At the same time, the mafia boss's right-hand man arrived while holding Olympia hostage. Eventually, Nancy and Sofia had to put down their guns to prevent Juana and Olympia from being shot. Shortly after, the mafia boss shot Nancy, causing her to fall, and Sofia retaliated, successfully eliminating the mafia boss's right-hand man. Not long after, Duke arrived holding Olympia hostage, threatening to kill her if the mafia boss didn't release Juana. Duke was convinced that the mafia boss desperately needed Olympia to assemble a nuclear weapon for the mafia boss. However, it was all just nonsense because Duke quickly shot the mafia boss, all as a form of revenge for his brother's death. But a new problem arose. Juana was hanging from the building due to slipping. Duke tried to save Juana, and eventually Duke succeeded in rescuing Juana. Several days later, Duke and his team celebrated the success of the mission. Shortly after, Duke was contacted by his former boss to invite Duke and his team back into their team. Duke and his team were ready to return happily. Then the film ends.